Hi, my name is Melinda, and welcome to Church at the Corner Online. We are so honored to have you join us today, and we hope you find this time encouraging and helpful. If this is the first time you're joining us, we'd love to know about it. So text the word Corner BG to 833-222-2630. That's the word Corner BG, all one word, to 833-222-2630, and we'll get a gift card in your hands for checking us out today. Pastor Tim is starting a new series today called My Big Fat Mouth, and it's how words can either affect us positively or negatively, and especially how they affect the people around us. So sit back and let's get started.
So today, we're launching a new series that we're calling My Big Fat Mouth. Because what we need to understand really is that our words that we speak are very, very powerful. They can kind of give life when they're spoken, or they can take away life when they're spoken. As a matter of fact, Jesus said this. He said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So for the next few weeks, we're going to talk about words, the words that we speak, and how to get those words right, because words are very powerful. In the upcoming weeks, we're going to talk about things like the problem of lying, the problem of criticizing, and then one I know we don't like to talk about because it steps on our toes pretty good, and that is gossiping, the power of gossiping. But today we're going to start off with a focus that is a little indicting, I think, if you want to say that, because I think a lot of us don't really understand at times that we're doing this. And to kind of set that theme up, I want to talk to you parents. If you have ever taken your kids to a place that you were really excited about taking them to, and you got there, and it was a really cool place to you, and you were really excited about it, but you got there, and all they wanted to do was just talk about how long they had to be there, that it was hot, they were hungry, that we came all this way to see this or do this. So we call that complaining. Complaining, complaining, and complaining. And that's going to be our subject today. I want to talk about the problem of complaining. You know, when I think about the complaining in the Bible, one of the places I immediately go to is in the Old Testament. When we think about God's chosen people, the nation of Israel, the Israelites, when they were in captivity as slaves for hundreds of years, they complained and complained and complained about being slaves. Then when God did miracle after miracle that we read about there in the Old Testament, when he issued 10 different malicious plagues to kind of help turn the heart of Pharaoh to let the people go. Then he parted the Red Sea once they did get to go. He drowned Pharaoh's army in that sea. And then we see that he fed God's people with manna from heaven miraculously, and water came from rocks when they were thirsty. They never ran out of clothing. But what did God's people do when you read there? They griped, they whined, they continued to complain. In fact, it's almost comical to me how much we see their mindset and the way they complain constantly. So we read in Exodus chapter 14, verse 11, Moses says this, was it because there were no graves, or actually they say to Moses, I'm sorry, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt, the Egypt that they were slaves in? We were so happy when we were slaves, really. Well, you complained all the time. But now you brought us out of there. Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Sounds like many of us, doesn't it? And to add insult to injury, Moses said something that should probably stun you into a moment of silence when he said this about complaining. He says, you know what? You're not grumbling against me or us. Who you're actually grumbling against? You're grumbling and complaining to God, against God. So imagine if every time you complained that it wasn't just about your circumstances or about the traffic or some other person. What if you realized in God's eyes you were actually complaining about Him? Perhaps that's the way He sees it when we complain. So what I want to do today is I want to help us to personalize this. And so I want to start out by kind of helping you frame this lens of complaining and ask you a question. What is it that you complain about most? Have you ever thought about that? What is it that you complain about most? Well, for me, it's probably I complain that I'm heavier than I'd like to be. Well, if you watch me on a daily basis, the way I eat, I think you'd understand that there's a reason for that. And I shouldn't be complaining about it. But what is it about in your life that you complain the most? Some of you would say maybe you complain because you're not married. You say, well, I wish I was married. And then you get married, and then you complain about your spouse. Maybe it's you complain about money, that money's tight, and the house you live in is too small, or your boss drives you crazy, or meetings that you have to go to, they're so boring and seem irrelevant. You know, it might be something smaller that you complain about, like the weather's bad. You got a bad Wi-Fi connection. Or there's nothing to watch on TV, even though you have Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney. We go on and on. But you complain that there's nothing to watch. So I want to go ahead and just clarify this, and I hope you'll understand that when you complain about the weather, the problem's not the weather. The problem's not the traffic. The problem's not that Netflix hadn't come out with some new original content that meets your approval. The problem is we've taken our eyes off the goodness of God, and we've placed our eye dead center on ourselves. That's the problem. And that leads to a constant curse called complaining. So I want to look at a text that I think every time I read it, it blows me away. I think it'll do the same to you. And it's written by the Apostle Paul. And if there's anyone who had a right to complain, especially where we pick up in Paul's life today, what we're going to look about, it was Paul. He had every reason to complain. Because the Apostle Paul really at the top of his bucket list, if you want to say that, was that he wanted God to send him to preach in Rome. He felt like that's where he could be the most effective. And that was his ultimate goal, his desire, was to go preach in Rome. But instead, now he went to Rome, but he was arrested and sent to Rome as a prisoner. Not actually the way he drew it up. Wasn't the dream that he dreamed. The preacher that he wanted to be in Rome, instead of a preacher, he's a prisoner. But not just a prisoner. He was actually locked up for about 2 years, 24 hours a day, but he was chained every minute that he was there to a Roman guard, awaiting possibly his execution. He didn't know what they were going to do with him. And to be honest, if you put me in Paul's place, I wanted to go to Rome as a preacher, but I'm there as a prisoner. I'm locked up. I've been serving God. I'm going to probably be tempted to complain to God. Hey, God, this isn't fair. Why are you allowing this to happen? I mean, you do know what I've done for you, right? I've been faithful. I'm the Apostle Paul. I've been shipwrecked. I've been beaten. I've been snake bitten. I've been left for dead. And all I've done is serve you, serve you, serve you. And you know how important and strategic the city of Rome is to getting the gospel to the rest of the world. So this is what the Apostle Paul penned, though, instead of what I think we would have done. He writes a letter to the Christians in Philippi while he was imprisoned, and he says this in Philippians 2, verses 14 and 15. He said, "Do everything without grumbling or arguing." Another version translates it, "Do everything without complaining." Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure children of God, without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Now, that's a very high standard. He's saying whatever you do, wherever you are, whatever deed or word, do everything without grumbling or complaining. Now, there's a lot of very spiritual reasons why we should live without complaining. There's a lot of practical reasons. And I want to talk about the spiritual reasons. But I want to spend just a moment and talk about some of the practical reasons. There's a doctor named Dr. Travis Bradberry, and he wrote a great book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And he's done a lot of research on the idea of complaining. And what he says is that repeated complaining hardwires our brain to do, guess what? More complaining. In other words, the more negative you are, the more likely your brain is going to be triggered to continue to be negative. He and others talk about what it means just to have this kind of negative mindset that before long we enter into what they call a confirmation bias. In other words, you expect something to be bad, therefore, you get what you expect. And see, this was the problem with the Israelites that we talked about a few minutes ago. They were negative when they were in captivity. They were negative when they were free because their negative mindset had trained them to be even more negative. And I think it's incredibly dangerous. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to go through life preconceived, preconditioned to find the bad when there's already enough bad in the world. I want to train my mind to find that which is good, that which is pleasant, and that which is helpful and hopeful, instead of always focusing on what's negative. You know those people. You've been around them. You grit your teeth when you have to be around them. But you may be one of those as well. And when we look at the Apostle Paul, the way he lived and what he taught, I think it communicates two big ideas here when we really look at Paul. To me, this is kind of the heart of what the message is this morning. And then I want to unpack it in a way that hopefully will motivate and speak to you in a powerful way. So Paul essentially, with the way he lived and what he would have taught, very likely would have said something like this. I think he would say, hey, if you can change your circumstances, then do something about it. If there's something negative and you can do something about it, then do something about it. If there are negative circumstances, something that's unpleasant, something that's not right, something that you wish you could change, and you actually can do something about it, then do something about it. Again, you know those people. All they do is complain. But if they put forth a little effort, maybe it would change their circumstance. In other words, we're not going to go through life and pretend like everything's okay when it's not. It's not a sin to notice something that's not right. When it boils into sin, actually, might be when we complain and complain and complain about it and don't ever do anything about it. That's when it might possibly be sin. You know, it's a little bit like Nehemiah in the Old Testament. When he recognized that the walls of Jerusalem were down, and we know he was very upset about it, his heart was broken. What did he not do? He didn't complain. He didn't say, well, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. Oh my gosh, those people are so vulnerable. Why didn't anybody else do something about it? He was bothered by it. And he did something about it. If there's something you dislike, something that gives you a righteous dissatisfaction, if there's a godly discomfort, if there's something you look at and you say, this isn't right on behalf of God, don't complain about it. Don't put comments on social media about it. Get out in the midst of your life and do something about it. If there's a negative situation and you can change it, then bring your A game and go change it. Then, by his teaching, I think he would also say this. If you can't change your circumstances, then change your perspective. Now, there's some things you can't change, but you can change your perspective about those things. If you can do something about it, then do something about it. If you can't, then change your perspective. Change what you say about it. Change how you think about it. Change what you see in those circumstances. And to me, this is very powerful. And Paul, again, writes to the church at Philippi, Philippians chapter 2, 17 and 18. If you remember, he was chained to a Roman soldier. Remember the context here. And he's awaiting possibly execution. And his dream was to preach the gospel in Rome, but he's locked up in prison in Rome. But this is what he says, and I love it. He says, but even if, and I love that phrase, but even if I'm poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and I rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me, even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering. I am still glad. Now, you may see that phrase or hear it and think, what in the world does he mean when he says poured out like a drink offering? Well, there's a Greek word here that's translated into the whole little phrase here, and that word is spendo, S-P-E-N-D-O, like to spend it all. This word is a very powerful little word here in this verse. But the audience that he was writing to would have understood it at that time. What the priest would do, the imagery here he's communicating to the people is the priest. What he would do is he would make a sacrifice to God, maybe with a lamb or some type of an animal, and put on a burnt offering, put it on a burnt offering. Then they would take a drink offering, which most of the time was the most expensive liquid that they had, usually wine, perhaps honey, because honey was difficult and expensive to buy then. And they would take their most expensive drink offering and they would pour it on top of the burning sacrifice. That would be the drink offering. And if you can imagine the imagery here, when you put something liquid on something really hot, what happens? Well, you get a little sizzle, but you get a lot of smoke. Smoke comes up. And this would be their offering to take their very expensive prize drink, pour it on the sacrifice, and the smoke would rise up to heaven as an offering of incense to God. So Paul says, even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering, yet I will still rejoice. Now, a lot of people think that when he said, I'm being poured out like a drink offering, he was talking about his ultimate martyrdom that came later. He was martyred when he actually gave his life and died. But I don't think that's the case. I wholeheartedly believe here that he's not talking about his ultimate death as being a sacrifice. The verb here, I think, is too passive, present tense. It says, even if I am being poured out, not even if one day I am poured out, but even as my life is oozing away, even right now. And his ultimate death was not his sacrifice in his mind here. It was his daily life that he was a sacrifice. This is why Paul said elsewhere, you offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. And this is your spiritual act of worship. See, worship isn't just lifting up our hands to a holy God, but worship is every single day offering your life wherever you are, even chained up in a Roman prison as an offering to God. So he's saying, this is my act of worship to you. So how could Paul be in prison, chained to a Roman soldier, and offer praise and worship to God? Well, let me tell you how I think he could do it. Paul was not the center of his own story. Jesus was the center of Paul's story. And because Jesus was the center of the story, that could take a negative circumstance and Paul could change his perspective about it in such a way that it would impact what God was able to do through his negative circumstance. This is why Paul said that. And I don't want us to miss the power here of what he says. Again, he's changed up 24 hours a day, a different Roman guard every 8 hours, a shift, so he had a different guy every 8 hours to preach to. And here's what Paul says, and it's so powerful. He says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. See, he got a new audience every 8 hours to preach to, advancing the gospel. And he's not complaining. He's changed his perspective, and he sees the power and the goodness of God in it. He says, what's happened to me has actually moved the message of Jesus forward. And he says, as a result, it's become clear to the whole palace guard. All these soldiers, they know it. Everyone else knows it. What do they know? They know that I am in chains for Christ. Not chains of Christ and complain, but chains for Christ and for his purpose. He says, you think I'm the prisoner here, but let me tell you who's the real prisoner. Every 8 hours, I get fresh meat. I get someone new. And they're some of the most powerful people in all of Rome. And they're chained to my arm for an 8-hour sermon that I write new for each and every one of them. So you think I'm the prisoner here? That I should be complaining? You've got no idea how God is using what others would see as negative to advance his gospel. In other words, this isn't my plan. This isn't what I would have chosen. You remember, I wanted to preach in Rome. Well, actually, I am now. There's a lot of reasons Paul would say, well, I probably could complain about this. But because I can't change my circumstance, I'm changing my perspective. I know that God works all things to bring about good according to his purpose, to those who love him and are called by his power. you see, I see my God doing something. And I don't know who this is going to speak to today. If Paul was here, I think he'd say that to you. But if you're in a place you don't like, you need to recognize God still has a plan. God still has a purpose. God still has an assignment. It may be the last thing that you would choose. It doesn't mean God can't use it to get the message of His goodness pushed forward. So think about that. Paul is chained to a Roman soldier 24 hours a day. So here's a question. What are you chained to? What are you chained to? Don't say your husband or your wife, but maybe it is a very painful relationship. Maybe it's a job situation that you don't know what you're going to do about it. Maybe you're chained to a financial issue. Maybe you're in the middle of a hole that you don't know how you're going to get out of financially. Maybe it's a health issue. I mean, obviously we could make a tremendous list and go on and on and on. But let me just say this to you. If you can do something about it, do something about it. If you can bring your A game, bring your A game. If you can pray and pray and pray, if you can work hard, work hard. If you can get counseling, get counseling. If you can seek help, seek some help. I mean, if it's a financial issue, there's all kinds of ways to help out there. Financial Peace University, Compass, Finances God's Ways. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to help you. If you need wisdom, go get some wisdom. If you can turn over a new leaf, turn it over. But if you just remember, if you can do something about it, do something about it. And then the second thing we looked at was, if you can't change your circumstance, change your perspective. Change the way you look at it. Change the way you think about it. Change the words that you speak about it. Rather than complaining about something you can't change. Choose to see God's presence and His power, even in the middle of something you would have never asked for. I'm going to unpack that in a very personal perspective here. Quickly, I'm going to tell you a story about a man that I grew up with. Went to high school with him. Tremendous athlete, played football with him, black belt in karate. He was a great physical specimen of a man. In his early 30s, he started having some issues. They couldn't figure out what it was, went through a lot of testing, and eventually they determined that he had this extremely, extremely rare disease that like 1 in every 400,000 people get. And basically, it was turning his inside, all of his organs were aging at a rapid rate. So at 30-something years old, his organs were like 20 years older. So he's been in that process now all these years. He's now 57 years old. He and I's birthdays are a week apart. He's been in a nursing home for almost 20 years now. He's lost his eyesight. He can't hear very well. And he just sits all day long in a chair with headphones. And that's his daily existence. And slowly, his organs are aging and shutting down. He knows what's next. And one day, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to be down there, and he was allowed at that point still to get out a little bit. So I went and picked him up from his nursing home, and I took him to lunch, and I had to feed him because he can't feed himself. We had a great visit, and as I was driving him back to the nursing home, my emotions kind of got to me. It was a beautiful day, and I just commented on how beautiful the day was, and I wished he could see it. And my emotions got the best of me, and I broke down, and I just said how much I hated what had happened to him. I didn't understand it. I was complaining for him. And he reached over with his arm, kind of trembling, to find me, and he grabbed hold of my arm, And he said, Tim, I want you to do something for me. He said, I don't want you to ever feel sorry for me. He said, I've got a wife that loves me. I've got 2 great kids that love me, that are going to be successful. Got a little friend there. He said, I'm one of the luckiest men on the earth. I've got a God that loves me. He said, so I don't want you to ever feel sorry for me. I took him back to his facility and left him and got down the road a little ways, found a side road, pulled off, and I wept for a while because the Lord was using him to show me that I don't have anything to complain about. And he couldn't change his circumstance. He can't. But he changed his perspective. Every time I talked to him just recently in the last few days. I asked him how he's doing. Man, I'm doing great. Man, I'm just so blessed and all. And all he does is sit there all day long with headphones on. You can change your perspective. You can change the way you look at things, and you can say, you know, I can't do anything about this, but I can choose to look for God in it. I can choose the way I speak about it. I can choose how I represent it. I can believe that this is the worst thing ever, or I can look for some sign that God is going to use me in it. And that's what my friend's done. You know, it may be that just a little more dependence on the goodness and the grace of God in the middle of what you're going through may allow you to change your perspective. You may pray a little bit more passionately because of it. It may draw you into a more intimate relationship with God because of your circumstance instead of complaining. And then one day, maybe you'll be able to have a little more compassion and be a little more helpful for somebody that might be going through the same thing. You may wake up 5 years from now and recognize that you're able to have a voice in people's lives because of what you've endured, and God did something kind of cool. See, if you can do something about it, do it. We're smart people. But if you can't do something about it, if you can't, there's no way. My friend can't change his circumstance, but he sure has changed his perspective about it. You know, I love the phrase Paul uses here in some of the verses we read here. He says, even if, and I think that's so powerful, even if at this moment I'm being poured out, he says, as a drink offering, even if my life is oozing away, even if everything I've wanted to accomplish never comes to pass. My friend had a bright future ahead of him. But even if that doesn't happen, he doesn't complain. He rejoices. Why? Because in the middle of this thing he's going through that he would have never asked for, he can see a glimpse of the goodness of God. And that God's still using him. He's using my friend to encourage so many of my buddies that I talk to that will say, man, I just recently talked to him, and man, it was so helpful to talk to him. He changed my perspective on so many things. So, see, he's being used to impact the folks that are in contact with him. And he's reminding all of us constantly that God's still good, even though what he's going through he would not wish upon his worst enemy. So how do we do this? How do we recognize this, that you're not the center of the story, that God is? And it changes how your story is to be told. See, the only way my friend can live this journey through this pain is to recognize that Jesus is the main character in the story of his life. My friend keeps bothering me here. And when you change your perspective, you can endure even in the middle of your darkest days. Some of you, I hope you remember to see the goodness in your life right now, no matter what you're complaining about, no matter what you're going through. That you'll recognize his blessings through whatever you're going through. Because no matter what you've gone through, or are going through, God's done something amazing. He's forgiven you of your sins. He heals diseases. He redeems people from death and crowns them with love and tender mercies. What does your God do? What does my God do? He fills my life with good things too. And let all that be praise to Him. It's there, even in the midst of what you're going through. So I don't know if this is speaking to you, and your life may be difficult right now. And if you can change something, I hope you'll recognize that and do it. If you can't, I hope you'll change your perspective and choose not to look at just what's wrong. My buddy could do that every minute of every day. Choose to look at the goodness of God. See His grace, see His power, see His goodness, experience His forgiveness. Let His Holy Spirit carry you when you're weak. Because, see, our strength is made perfect in Him. Let everything that I am be praised to the Lord, and let everything that I give glory to Him. And that's how, in the middle of a Roman prison, that's how sitting in a chair all day long in a nursing home with headphones. That's how Paul and my friend can say, you can do everything and go through everything without grumbling or complaining. And whatever it is, like it or not, it can be used to advance the gospel. Even if my greatest prayers never answered, even if I never get out of this situation that I wish I was not in, I will still praise my God because He's good. He never leaves me. His presence is with me. His power is in me. Therefore, I will praise Him with everything that I have. Our words are so powerful. Let's pray. Father, I ask that today that there would be a special grace, especially for those who are facing significant trials. When it's so easy to complain about the big stuff or even the little stuff, God, I pray that if we can do something about it, we would. And if we can't, give us the power to change our perspective. I'm so thankful for a number of examples, but especially the example of my friend who's lived this out in front of me and how you've used him to advance the gospel. Because no matter what he goes through, he never complains. His perspective is through the lens of you. That's how he looks at everything. So Father, I pray that you'll encourage us to be those people. Help us to be those people. It's possible. I've seen it, just as I'm sure many others have too. So help us in this fight against the enemy who wants us to do the opposite. Father, I pray there's somebody here watching today, listening, and they feel this tug to seek you, that they'll do that. And that will give them the opportunity to have the kind of perspective that we're talking about, because they're going to receive forgiveness, grace, and mercy that they don't deserve. So there'll always be something good. So we trust you to move in their hearts, and if we can help them in any way, answer any questions, they could reach out to us. Father, we'd be honored for that to happen. So Father, we thank you for Jesus, who makes all this possible, and we trust this in his name. Amen. Well, guys, you're going to want to be sure and join us next week for part 2 of My Big Fat Mouth.
Sing to the Lord when your heart is heavy. Sing to the Lord a new song of praise. Sing to the Lord, all you Sing to the Lord always, always. I sing because you're faithful. I sing because you're strong. My hope and my salvation, you'll always be my song. In mourning and in dancing, in light and shadow, long in every situation, you'll always be my song. You'll be my song. Sing to the Lord when your heart is rejoicing. Sing to the Lord, all you children of grace. Sing to the Lord, oh, your Father is calling. Sing to the Lord always, always. I sing because you're faithful. I sing because you're strong. My hope and my salvation, you'll always be my song. In mourning and in dancing, in light and shadow, long in every situation, you'll always be my song. You'll be my song. You'll be my song. You'll be my song. There has never ever been a time that you weren't worthy. There will never ever be a time that you're not holy. There has never ever been a time that you weren't worthy. There will never ever be a time that you're not holy. There has never ever been a time that you weren't worthy. There will never ever be a time that you're not holy. You're holy. There has never ever been a time that you weren't worthy. You're worthy. There will never ever be a time that you're not holy. I sing because you're faithful. I sing because you're strong. My hope and my salvation, you'll always be my song. In mourning and in dancing, in light and shadow, long in every situation, you'll always be my song. You'll be my song. You'll be my song. You'll be my song. There has never ever been a time that you weren't worthy. There will never ever be a time that you're not holy. There has never ever been a time that you weren't worthy. There will never ever be a time that you're not holy.